Welcome to the Boundless Bible. My name is David Shapiro.
Hey, I'm Javi Marquez.
And I'm Jason Holloway. Hi there, and welcome to our part 2 of our first part 2 series. We are very excited that you're joining us, and without further ado, we are going to pick up where we left off last week. So, as always, hope you enjoy. Thanks a lot.
But when we look at the suffering, and here comes the bigger question, and I will tell you that this is the number one holdup. This is the number one holdup to any atheist or any agnostic to believing in Christ. And it is the question of, why does a good God, an all-powerful God, allow evil? And that is the number one question. Why does he allow evil? Because like you said, Javi, there is evil in the world. We can't deny it. We can't close our eyes to it. There is evil. Why does God allow it?
That's good. God allows evil. I think, man, it's a tough subject to talk about. But when I think about evil, for me, in my experience, the best way I could say this, when I think about good and evil, you need, I believe God at times uses evil for us to grow, to persevere through for good.
Mm-hmm.
I really feel that way. When I look back at the Bible and I see things, that's what I see it. Yes, I see God being wrathful for, the Egyptians for doing what they're doing. God was wrathful to the town of Sodom and Gomorrah, and only kept a couple, right? God was good with Noah and kept him alive, but did the flood for so many others. There is good there, although we see it through calamity and what's happening, but there's good within that. So that's how I see God. I see God as a good God, and that's how I
agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that God uses bad stuff for good. I do. My question back to both of you is, do you think that the bad stuff is happening because God wills it to happen, because God intentionally wants it to happen, or do you think something else?
Wow. So when I think about, this, I'm going to sum this up all together. We're going back to the flesh thing.
Okay.
I'm thinking about Adam and Eve. I'm thinking about the beginning of sin and the beginning of, let's say, evil. Even though I have a bigger question, I think evil was already started then. But when I think about that, I think about God cannot make a square circle. He could do it. He has the power to do it. But he would contradict himself for making a square circle.
Look at you paradoxing.
So because of that, I believe once we have evil and evil is already here, he tries to make it good. But we've brought upon evil.
But what you're saying is evil exists because good exists, because it's duality. You can't have a squared circle, just like you can't have good without evil.
So you're saying that, and you said that evil already existed with, so what do you mean by that?
By duality's standpoint, it would have existed the moment goodness existed, or at least the concept of it.
So
right?
what I thought about the other day was thinking about evil, thinking about, just God's wrath. I think about going back to Adam and Eve and the tree, the knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
I said it right. There you go.
Nailed it.
The knowledge of good and evil. It's a knowledge of good and evil. It's a tree that has good and evil already before Adam and Eve bit it. Bit the apple.
That was good.
So to me,
I never thought of that.
Wait a minute. Evil was already here from the beginning, and I could say maybe going back to Lucifer, and he was dethroned or just cast out of heaven, right? So that was evil right there, trying to be God.
Even before Eden.
And that was before Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where evil started?
See, okay, so this is perfect, because this is what I'm talking about for me when I look at the Genesis story. The Genesis story doesn't necessarily have to be a literal story. It can be an ideological story that tells us a story about something. And what you just said is one of those messages that's like drilled into the bottom where you got to dig to find it, but it's there.
Yeah.
If the tree of knowledge of good and evil exist, that means that evil already existed. Now, the question is, again, was that intentional or not? I don't know, but I do agree with you. I think the duality is you can't have, at least on this plane, you can't have good without having evil. It exists by virtue of existing.
Right, and going back to
it doesn't have to be created. It is created at the same time you create good.
Right, and going back to what keeps boggling my mind, that word you were talking about, the Jewish word about the flesh thing, it just kind of is crazy for me because it unpacks everything. God cannot make a square circle, right? He cannot he can't do the opposite of what he's already intended. So he tries to justify it. And he justified our flesh, our sinful ways, by bringing us and giving us the Lamb. I feel like he made us for him, and he wants us to still be with him, but he is so perfect and good, and we're so on the opposite side of him, sinful and evil. And in order to mend that relationship, there has to be that blood. It has to be that lamb, that sacrifice.
So
to bring us together.
let me sum up what I think you're saying. So are you saying that, and maybe this is it, this is a weird one.
Okay.
God is good. Humans by nature are evil.
Yes.
Are we the evil? Or at least part of us?
Our flesh is.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
believe
I'm
our
just
flesh-
summing
yeah.
it up. And that's what
Yeah,
you're
I
saying,
believe
though.
our
It's like
flesh is-
essentially the minute we took that bite, we became the other evil.
Okay. I want to jump in real
In a
quick.
simple way, yeah.
Apologetics, defending the faith.
Yeah.
Defending my faith, my beliefs. It's not defending God. That's not what apologetics is. I don't feel like God needs a defense.
No.
But at the moment, I'm going to defend God.
Yeah, great.
And I'm only going to kind of jump right back into the garden because it's a huge statement. Hey, if there is the tree that has good and evil, and
Right.
God did put it there,
Mhm.
Right.
and that's saying that God created evil, and that's one of those things where we go, okay, if people say God created evil, and why would I follow a God that created evil? And apologists go, no, evil was not created, and it was the fall and all of that.
Mhm.
Let me just take that piece
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
second, and let me unpack it in one of the old Jewish scholars' point of view. And when you look at the tree of good and evil, what basically is happening is God has created a man and a woman and said, you're going to be in charge of earth. I'm going to give you dominion
Right.
over everything.
Yes.
They are going to need wisdom from how to handle these things. Remember, they're brand new.
That's good.
They don't have wisdom. They're going to need it.
They were just dirt a second ago. Yes, of course.
But I feel like, hey, to have the wisdom of what's right, what's wrong, what's going on, how do I handle
Yeah.
these things?
Yeah.
There is good and evil wisdom they're going to need. The school of thought that a lot of old Jewish scholars have
I'm on the edge of my seat
is
here,
that
man.
they were going to share from this tree, from God anyway, but it wasn't their time yet. God was going to have to give them the wisdom.
Right.
The problem with man
So
is
they knew what to
he
do with it before.
rushes
Yeah.
and grabs the wisdom for
Which is the
himself.
sin.
Right.
The sin right there.
And then the sin was, again, them
Yeah.
not repenting of it.
Yeah.
But if they were going to have the fruit anyway to get that wisdom, God was preparing them to yield it. I need to prepare to yield it because they grabbed it immediately. They felt shame. They started this downward spiral of
This
the
is good.
flesh.
They didn't know what to do with it.
They didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
It's
They-
good.
And I feel like, again, God doesn't need defense, but I don't think he created evil.
I think you're right.
I think he created the choice. Here's the tree. It wasn't done as a test because people go, oh, he tested. No, it wasn't a test. It was literally this tree has a purpose. The
Yeah.
purpose is to give wisdom
Yeah.
to man. The problem is that man jumped the
They
gun
jumped
like
the
he
gun.
does.
Right.
Yeah.
And because of that, all of this happened.
By you saying that though, by looking at it that way, you unpack so many things now, right? So now you need wisdom, you need discipline, you need to know how to do life,
You do.
and God will give you that.
Yeah.
God will help you through these turmoils, these sufferings, these things you come up against, or even knowing how to deal with others in relationship. He has to do that because we're free, right?
Mhm.
That's the other thing, right? I think free will has to do with that. But I just wanted to go back with that. I think you unpacked something really great, which is God didn't give them the wisdom yet, not the right time for you to gain this wisdom. And as he was going to give you the wisdom, we still need that divine power, that divine intellect to wield this life that we have.
Yeah, it's discipleship also. This is what it
Right.
is. God is the ultimate disciple. We are supposed to learn from him. We jumped the gun. And I think in our free will, we did bring evil into this world. I truly believe that it was not God who created
You know what?
evil.
That's the right way to put it.
I think he
humans aren't evil. Humans brought it in.
Yes.
Humans were the ring bearers of evil into the world.
I agree.
Yeah. That's a better way. That's
Well,
a
then
much
the question
better.
would be, what's the inception of that
Okay.
even evil?
So let's be.
Like, where do you get that bone, that chromosome, whatever it is, DNA to even attempt to go against God.
I mean, I'll tell you my answer. And we haven't yet talked about why bad things happen, despite the fact that that's what we're talking about. But I understand why we're starting with evil because and it makes total sense to me for this reason.
Yeah.
For me, you just said, did God create evil? I don't think he created evil. I think he created goodness. And I think when he created goodness, by nature, what comes next is the opposite of that. And then the next thing that's important is he gave us free will. He gave us the free will to either eat that thing or not eat that thing. And we've spent the rest of our entire history having free will. Free will, for me, is how I see evil coming into this world. We have a choice to do good things or bad things.
That's a good point right there.
Now, the reason that a lot of bad things happen is because humans do them. Humans have a choice to make the right decision. They have a choice to make the bad decision, and we continue to make bad choices, specifically selfish choices and immediate gratification choices. And those choices add up to bad things. The person who gets hit by a drunk driver who's driving in the opposite direction, that wasn't because God made that happen. It's because that person who was driving that car made a series of bad decisions and it ultimately happened. And I have to accept that because I don't think that there's a world in which this God does those things. And I don't think that's wrath or not wrath. I think that there's a separation between the concept of wrath and a separation of the concept of bad things happening. So for me, anything that when I start looking at bad things happening and starving and poverty and children being abused, I see that as human decision or the multiplication of thousands of bad human decisions being what causes them. Yeah. And is God present? God's present in everything, but God doesn't force his hand. He forces his discernment.
So what you're talking about is moral evil.
And at the end, all of it though.
Rather than talking about maybe like calamity, talking about destruction, right? Hurricanes, earthquakes.
But those are just decisions too, though. That's not a matter of. And I'm not saying that's human.
You know what I'm saying? Like
I'm saying,
what happens to that kind of evil?
But that's just nature, though, dude. Like that's just nature. I mean it. Like that's just nature, right? Like you can't blame stuff on God because it's easy to blame stuff on God. Just understand the world spins. And when it spins, the earth, the atmosphere spins. And when the atmosphere spins, some stuff goes crazy. Like it just happens.
But did God create the earth if we're saying he created everything, did he create the earth to allow for these tsunamis and earthquakes and things like that to happen? And is that considered evil? And I do think that people have this thought, and it could be, it could be disease. It could be cancer. It could be.
Exactly. It could be something that you had no control over.
Absolutely. Hold on, guys. I hate to tell you this, but there is a decision that was involved. If not all the time, not all the time, but many times, like a lot smoking, right? Like nobody told you should be smoking. Mm-hmm. The cigarette industry should not have existed the way it was, and the amount of lung cancer that happened. There's a good amount of those things that can be traced back to human the exponential.
How about like stillborns? How about things that really you can't control?
Again, I don't blame those on God.
No, we're not blaming
those
on God.
again
I'm just saying
just the
people that maybe
nature
are dealing with, or
they're terrible.
It just seems as terrible things that maybe obviously we're not blaming God, but it is not blaming moral sin. We can't blame the earth for happening. It just that happens, and for them it's evil. It's wrong.
Yep.
And for God allowing that to happen, right? Because he has the power to take that away. To not happen is where the struggle comes in.
For sure. I'll give you my perspective.
Please.
And this is something that I've always thought was interesting, and I might be way off here with some things. God might look at me and just laugh. But when you look at natural disasters, let's take that first. You look at a natural disaster and you go, man, it's horrible how this tornado killed all these people and destroyed a town. But there are also, I don't know how many people that are tornado chasers that think tornadoes are the most beautiful thing.
They are.
That, I mean, when you start looking at it, you go, wow, that's incredible. When you look at lightning, I love going outside and watching lightning strikes. When lightning strikes somebody and kills them, it becomes a tragedy.
A tragedy, for sure.
And so when you look at it, you go, is it the fact that this is something that is evil that God has done? Or is the sad part when human and God's creation clash?
Yeah.
And you go, man, that's a tragedy, but it doesn't take away from the beauty of what God created because man loves that. When you look at diseases, I'm telling you, have you ever looked in a microscope at some of these?
Yeah, it's incredible.
They're the most intricate, incredible things to look at. And I'm going, it's horrible and devastating to people, and it ruins lives and kills people. And people look at that and go, well, that's evil. But there are other people spend their entire life studying it, thinking it's the most beautiful thing ever created.
So let me clarify my position, because I think what I just said probably came off really, really harsh. And I don't mean it to sound harsh at all. Yeah. What I mean to say is that I truly believe that God created this world, created people, created all things. He created them. And then he said, go be you and go do what you do. Yeah. You have the free will. The earth has maybe not has a free will, but the earth is going to do what earth does. Earth going to earth, right? Mm-hmm. And nature going to nature, and people going to people. Like it's just going to happen. Like there is no, his will is not being imparted upon any one of those things. Each cause is part of an effect. Each action is part of a reaction, and so on down the line. And the better things happen, the better stuff happens. The bad stuff happens, the bad stuff happens, right? Where God's input becomes divine and becomes a part of guiding history alone is through the discernment that we get in listening. The bad thing happens, we get a chance to listen. What could I have done differently? What did I do wrong? What could I be doing better? What could I have done instead of that? Or how could I respond to the situation that was negative in a positive way? For me, it's not about God pushing things in one way or the other, but giving the voice that says how to deal with next. Yeah. How to accept responsibility for certain things, not everything. I understand. I'm not saying that cancer is an accepted responsibility. I'm saying that just some things in nature just are what they are, and we just have to accept that they're kind of random and they just happen that way. There are things, and I'm not smart enough or wide enough or broad enough to be able to understand all of them, but we've all been through it. We've been through something bad, and we want to blame God. But instead, if we stop for a second and go, you know what, maybe it's totally random. It's just nature. Or maybe I had a part in that. Or maybe that was spending time around other people who were making really bad choices and it ended up affecting me in this way. There's a certain amount of that, right? I mean, so I just take a very naturalistic view to all this stuff. I don't think that God's pulling the strings to make the bad stuff happen. No. I think the bad stuff happened because humans are pulling the strings in the wrong way, and I think we all have to take our own personal responsibility for those things. So I think listen to God in making those responsible choices. I
think that when we look at people, we go, people are going to people. When you look at really horrible tragedies, when you look at the Holocaust, when you look at the atrocities in Africa, when you look at these things, we go, well, there is a person who is making a free will decision that God allows you to make. Yeah. And this is a result of that. I don't think that, I've heard this said in a million different ways by a million different people. Yeah. And I think we understand that. If you don't understand that, if you feel like, well, I don't know what free will is and all that, it's a separate conversation. Yeah. Sure. But I think God does give free will. We understand it. People sometimes use it for bad.
They do.
What about those moments like the flood that we talked about, or like when Joshua is going in, to Canaan and God is ordering them?
I recently read in Isaiah, when I was reading, Isaiah talks about using Cyrus to wipe out Babylon for the Israelites. You just wiped out a bunch of people for other people. You use Cyrus, I hate to go back, Jason, but like pull the strings to use Cyrus to wipe out Babylon, which is a group of people. Obviously, they were really horrible and they did atrocious stuff to the Israelites, but he did. He wiped them out, right? In a war, in a sense, right?
I think that goes back to the wrath conversation, though, right? That's why these things are intertwined. Like the difference for me is between intention and unintention. I think the intention was put a flood on this earth. I think the intention was wipe out the Babylonians. I don't think that the hurricane knocking my house down is intention. I think that's, and I think for me, I separate those two things. Like, did something bad happen did I lose my job? Did I, wreck my car? Did I get a health scare? Like, did one of those things happen? Like, I don't think any of those things were intentional. I don't think those were wrathful things. I think those were conditions set long before that were just action after reaction after action after reaction. And maybe I had a part in it. Maybe I didn't. Maybe it is randomness. Yeah. The question isn't what happened to me. The question is, what am I going to do about it? Yeah. And I can consult with God and say, what's next? What should I do in this situation?
Thank you for saying that. That's exactly what I was going to say. I was like, you don't stop there. You don't just leave it and go, well, no. God did this or whatever it is. But be like, hey, God, this is what happened to me. Help me through this. Help me to persevere through this.
How do I make this into a positive?
And again, I'm putting this out there because these are the things that we hear. Right now we have the Israelites. They come free from Israel. Moses is with them. They are, denying God, and God is like, I'm going to destroy all of them. And then Moses goes, whoa, wait a minute. Let me talk to you for a second.
Yeah.
And convinces him not to.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Now, is this God about to do something evil and a human talks him out of it? Is this,
which is crazy,
free will? Is it like there is a fine line that I think people do have legitimate concerns for going, are we looking at an evil God, or are we looking at an all powerful God that's loving and people are have the free will? How could Moses convince him of something? What's going on here?
The way I sum it up for me and like my faith, I believe God is good. We have a good God. We got a righteous God, and He loves us so much. But in order for Him to have love for us, He has to allow free will. And through going back to what Jason was saying, and we kind of we're beating a dead horse here, but like free will becomes people get, they want to kill you. They want your possessions. They have their own intent involved with that, and God has to separate. He has to go, well, you decided to do that, but He will only allow that for so long, right? That person or that thing will be judged upon, whether now or later on in the afterlife or whatever it is. So,
your question, your question's one that's stumped me a few times in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, did Moses actually convince God not to kill them? Like, did God really need that? I can't say I have much of any proof behind this other than to say it also seems like a story to me where God was ready to go wipe the slate again and like, you're not getting there.
Sure.
But Moses showed care. So it's really more of a story. Moses showed enough care and enough belief in the people that he was with to step up and say, you know what? I know they probably deserve it, but I'm gonna take them on. I'm gonna take them under my wing. It's more of like a story behind Moses' care for the people and why Moses was worthy to do what Moses was doing. So it may not be anywhere connected to any of that, but that's how I approach that story.
Did He convince God to
that, and also if you look at present day, we pray and go, well, what's the point in praying if we have free will and God's not going to get involved? What's the point in praying? And we go, well, God does get involved, and we pray because hopefully we can convince Him to save our loved ones. And
the thing is God's will, and God's will is going to will it the way He wants. We see that back in Jesus. Jesus prayed, please take this cup away from me. I do not want to go through this suffering. This is horrible what I'm about to go through. God said, you're coming back to paradise.
So I struggle with this one too.
You're going to be crucified.
But does that mean He wills suffering?
That was His will.
So this is why I can't, that's exactly why I can't abide by that thought. And I just can't, because it does mean that His will is, if you believe that His will is whatever happens, then His will is that some little child in Africa is going to starve to death today. And I can't abide by that thought. And I have a really hard time with that. Well, let me get to where I get to.
Yeah.
So for me, again, when I pray, the prayer is not that He changes the thing in the other person or that changes the thing that I'm asking to change. The prayer is that I get the discernment to deal with whatever's coming. Mm-hmm. And I pray that the person who is also the doctor who's dealing with that thing gets that voice of reason in his head to go, you know what, maybe I should check that again. Or maybe I should look at it this way. Or maybe I should try this thing. Or maybe this article is going to pop up that'll teach me something I didn't know 10 minutes ago. I don't pray for the spontaneous changing of the universe. Not because I don't believe in it, because I just don't understand that. So I pray for the discernment to know what to do with whatever comes, right. and the pure hope that if anybody else who's involved in this that has a moment to hear will hear the right thing.
So what you're saying is you're praying to God saying, hey, help me to go through this, or help me to make the right decisions, and everything else that's happening in the world is your will.
No, because again,
you take care of that, God.
Let me put this in another way too. I do, but here, you know what got me for the longest time was the idea God has a plan for your life, and then something bad would happen in my life, and I would go, God planned for that? Dude, I had the hardest time with that, and then I realized something. Do you realize what a plan is not a preset thing.
Yeah.
A plan is a constantly changing thing.
That's good.
So if God's plan is for me to get from here to that place over there, I might take 37 steps to the left, 42 to the right, 16 backwards, 112 forwards, miss the mark, fall off the cliff, and then I have to do 12 other things. Like for me, God's plan is just what's next. in after I make a bunch of screw ups. Like I might make a couple good steps.
Yeah.
I'm going to screw up a bunch of them, but each time his plan rerouting. We've heard the GPS, conversation before. I make a left turn and the GPS reroutes. It's more akin to that. And so God's plan is not what he's going to make happen next. It's what happens next based on everybody. And I'm talking billions and billions of decisions, a trillion molecules, moving in a trillion different directions, 100 different storms moving in 100 different directions. All of that math and physics and science and shaking and momentum and action, reaction, breaking and fixing, all of that stuff is what's going to happen. The question is, to what extent are we going to then listen to God to take the next right step in the new rerouted path every 35 milliseconds?
When I look at this and I think about, this is a very complicated, heavy, this is one of those things you can't just describe okay, you got it.
No,
and especially if you're struggling with, if I'm struggling with belief, if I go, I don't believe in God, I believe he's evil, I believe this, I believe that, and I'm listening to this, I'm like, well, wait, there are moments where I'm like, it does seem like he's evil and I don't understand this. I think about when I was a kid, I would watch TV and I would think about this. I would go, I have no idea how this image gets in this TV.
Yeah.
And I can read about it
Totally.
and I can learn about it, but I really don't understand it.
Nope.
And now that I'm older, I'm going, literally right now, somebody from China can call me on my phone and instantly when they speak, I'm hearing them.
Yes.
I don't understand how that happens.
Yeah.
Now I understand radio waves and how it goes and hits a satellite. I understand all of that, but I don't really understand it. And I look at God and I go, I understand certain things about God. I understand what, the Bible says about God. I understand certain things, but I really don't understand what the purpose is for everything.
Yeah.
And I'm not God.
I agree.
And when I look at it, I go, this is a loving God. This is a God who did give his only son to die a horrible, tragic, torturous death for us. And when I look at that, I go, well, doesn't that mean that God's evil then? He's even doing it to his own, to his own flesh, him is in the flesh.
That's a good.
And all of that. And you're going, I don't know. I really don't. I can't sit here and go, I am 100% sure that this is God, this is not God. What I do know is a loving God who loves each and every one of us. We do make mistakes, but we have no idea what happens later, what happens next. I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. Everything has changed. I walk out of a room and I go back in an hour later. That room has changed. Yeah. There are different dust particles. Yeah. That room has changed. Yeah. It's not the same room anymore. So for me, when I'm looking at what happens, what happened at the flood? For all I know, I'm cursing God going, I can't believe you did this to the entire world. Yeah. For all I know, the entire world could be in heaven right now. I don't think so. Because he talks about how man was, but maybe he stopped it before man got to the point of too far and now you can't get in.
Yeah, exactly.
You just never know.
You never do. And you know what somebody said once, like how many bad things stopped worse things?
Okay.
Yeah.
How many bad things that happened to you stopped worse things from happening? And to your point, maybe the flood was because something worse could have happened. Maybe the flood was actually a saving point. It's like, bad example, but throwing people off a sinking boat. Like you save the 10, you're not able to save the 50. Like a bad example. And again, sounds bad, but the other thing,
there's truth to it.
Well, I mean, look, the more I grow older, the more I realize one thing, and it's an uncomfortable truth, is that the world's just not this happy-go-lucky place all the time. You have things, people die. We don't like that fact. We don't appreciate that fact. We try every minute of our lives to forget that fact, but it is. Life itself, we talked about this a moment ago, is suffering. There's a lot of suffering in life, and we live in a culture now that does everything to ignore that suffering and to appease that suffering. But it's not really suffering. It's just life. Like we're putting the negativity on it. It's just life.
But death is the death of the body. And that's the part where you look at it and you go,
totally.
We are cursing the death part because we're still living.
Yeah.
That's who's sad about the death is the living.
Right.
You never know what's happening next.
Well, what I was referring to wasn't the death part. I'm just saying life itself is by nature has a lot of negative things, or at least things that we attribute negative qualities to. It's just a lot of negative stuff. But God isn't necessarily trying to hurt us with those things. It's just life. It's just the stuff that happens. And then we are so accustomed to attributing that negativity to something and trying to solve it immediately that it's easier to blame God than it is to say that's just life.
What is it? You can't have scrambled eggs without some broken what is it?
without breaking some shells.
Yeah, break some shells,
Yeah.
so.
And that's just life, and it's an uncomfortable thing. But there's just a lot of bad stuff that happens in life, and I don't think that
that's
think
a
it's
simple way to say
so
it,
this is
right?
what maybe this is what I've been trying to say. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens. It doesn't mean it's evil. It doesn't mean it's intentional. It doesn't mean that it's against you. It will feel against you because it's your life, but it doesn't mean it's being done intentionally to you. And it's hard. And it's hard to separate those things.
And it's going to happen regardless.
Exactly.
So if you go, I believe in God,
Yeah.
and I'm praying to God that these things don't happen, or you changing me to be able to accept these things and be able to live through it in a better way, these things are still happening. If you go, I don't believe in God, these things are still going to happen.
You have nothing to stand on at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You have nothing to stand on.
And that's my point.
Me too. And that's it. Like we may not, it sounds like we don't exactly share the exact same theology here, but at the end of the day, we do agree.
Yes.
Like God is good.
Yeah.
And following God is the best way for us to be the best humans we can be. And it can be the best way that we can serve the rest of the world in being good. And this is at the end of the day, that's what it is. And whether any of us have any of this even remotely right doesn't really matter as long as we focus on that last part, right?
Yeah.
We all believe that if we follow our hearts, we pray, we believe in God, we believe in the sacrifice, we believe that that we're going to be born again at the end, and we tried our best to show our fruits before that point, we're in a good place.
Yeah. Well, like you said earlier, as a parent, if you have a child who's trying to put a metal knife into a socket, electrical socket, we go, no. And we want God to do that. God, come down and stop us from that happening. But if we knew the future, if we go, hey, if my child does this, they're going to get a little zap now, but it's going to prevent them later in life from grabbing a wire and killing themselves. We'd go, absolutely. Let me put that fear in them and allow that to stop something worse from happening. And I think that's, God knowing everything changes perspective that we can't ever comprehend. But I agree. This is an all-loving God.
But that's a great analogy, though. I mean, sometimes a little bit of pain is necessary. When I said it's an uncomfortable truth, like that's one of those uncomfortable truths. Like sometimes you have to skin your knee to learn not to run on the pool deck, right? Like sometimes you have to touch the burner on the stove to learn that fire's hot. Like we all have these scars, but those scars taught us something, and those scars are how we became who we are. And some of them were physical, some of them were mental, some of them are emotional. But I think that's what I meant to say by the uncomfortable truth is like, we don't want these things, but they're not evil. They're just part of being alive.
No, I completely agree. I think that if you are struggling with, whether or not this is true, whether God exists, whether he's allowing evil, whether he created evil, whether he is evil, I think that one of the things that we always miss, because sometimes we get so logical, and to outthink God is just never going to happen.
Absurd.
But we try to use logic, and then you have this moment of testimony and feeling. And that's the one thing I always go back to when I go, you know what, you're right. I can debate for hours the logic that I feel is in God's free will that he gives us and in evil and all of that. But like I said in the beginning, God doesn't need me to defend him. But what I know he did is he put a story inside of every one of us.
Oh, yeah.
You might not know your story yet.
Yeah.
You might not even be open enough to explore what that story is. But there is a story inside every one of us. There is a moral code that we're born with, every one of us. Every one of us is born with this thought of what's right and wrong without being taught that. Where did that come from? That's not just randomness.
Not at all.
That created into every single one of our brains.
Into every single human that's ever lived, in fact.
Yep.
I mean, that's, even the concept of a God at all has been everywhere all the time. And maybe it might have been expressed in the wrong ways, or people might have understood it in the wrong ways, but it all comes back to the central truth that everyone is very aware that there's a God. Everybody is aware that there's something bigger and greater and grander than us.
Yep.
Because look at us.
And you should be, for anybody who believes in, hey, there's evolution and, evolution created us and there's no God and there's no anything. What I look at is there's survival of the fittest. Why is it if somebody falls on a subway tracks, does somebody else jump in and pull them out?
Yeah.
Right.
Survival of the fittest, you'd be like, oh well, you're getting killed. My DNA is going to exist. I'm survival. You're not.
Yeah.
We jump in because we have this moral code that's embedded in us that comes from God. That's what God is. That love is directly attributed to God. And I feel like if you're struggling, just look inside yourself, look at that story, look at what has driven you even to question it. Right now, if you're listening and you don't believe in God, you're listening for a reason. There's that little nudge inside
that
of you
wants to
going,
believe it, even if you don't, right?
Yep.
You want to believe it because it would be nicer to believe that God is all good and all loving and all good. I mean,
but we want God to be all in control
exactly
and making everything
Right.
perfect. And
Right.
that's not the reality of what God is. God is 100% powerful and loving, but he is so smart and so loving. He gave us free will to do with this life.
to learn our own lessons.
Absolutely.
And the boundaries by which to do them through punishments, through consequences, whatever those happen to be. I'm also having this visual right now of like, we're the kid, right? And God's the father or the mother who scolds us. And at first we like turn around and we're angry. Well, I'm not going to love you anymore. And then we turn around and later, what should we do? We should go back and hug that parent and say, thanks for taking care of me, right? Like that's what you were saying a moment ago. Like, I think you have to remember that it's still a God that loves you. And even though you don't like every part of what happens, it's still a God that loves you. And you need to take time to just remember all the good stuff as well. You need to take a moment to acknowledge all of the beauty and the grandeur and the majesty and the wonder and the mystery that's out there. And just appreciate that too. It's easy to get focused on just the negative, but you have to intentionally look at the positive as well. And when you do, you're going to see it and you're going to feel it.
Yeah, we always want more. That's us.
Yeah, it's us.
It's not enough. I want more.
It's never enough. Yeah, that's these bodies for you.
Yeah. But this was a heavy topic. We definitely appreciate you listening. There's going to be a lot more of these just really difficult, heavy topics for conversation, just to make sure you guys understand, there are different areas that people get hung up on. There are some questions that people have. We'd love to hear your questions. If you're thinking about something, definitely write in, email us.
So yeah, guys, this has been a big conversation. This has been heavy for all of us, but it's also been very eye-opening. And I know that we're all going to kind of take a moment to think about this. And I assume that we're going to wake up tomorrow morning and start texting each other with a bunch of new ideas as well. So maybe this will turn into another podcast still. But we always appreciate you guys listening. We would love to hear your questions, your comments, your thoughts. Do you agree with one of us? Do you disagree with one of us? Do you think we're all wrong?
Yeah.
Let us know.
I was going to say, everyone is really giving us some good praises and just like liking the podcast. Hey, take action, like the podcast, comment. That helps out with all this information that we're sharing this podcast to many others.
We don't like indifference.
We don't like indifference indeed. So be passionate. Love us, hate us, or let us know either way. Appreciate it. Until next time.
Peace.
See ya.